There are nights when the moon simply vanishes from the sky. Not hidden behind clouds, not obscured by storms, just gone. Astronomers call it a black moon, a rare celestial event when the new moon aligns perfectly with the sun, rendering it completely invisible to the human eye. Most people never notice. Most people never look up. But on this particular night, everyone would notice. The city of Ashford had always been ordinary. 73,000 people living predictable lives in predictable patterns. Street lights flickered on at exactly 6:15 each evening. Traffic signals changed in their eternal rhythm. The hum of electricity was so constant that no one even heard it anymore. It was just the white noise of modern existence. Until 9:47 p.m. on October 31st, when every single light went out simultaneously, not gradually, not section by section. Every bulb, every screen, every glowing device died in the same instant, as if the city itself had stopped breathing. The darkness that followed wasn't just an absence of light. It was complete, suffocating, absolute. The kind of darkness that makes you forget what your own hand looks like, even when held inches from your face. People stumbled out of their homes, calling out to neighbors they couldn't see. Car alarms wailed uselessly into the void. Somewhere in the distance, a child was crying. The emergency backup systems at the hospital should have activated. The cell towers should have had their own power supplies. But nothing worked. It was as if electricity itself had been erased from existence within the city limits. What no one knew, what they couldn't have known, was that 16-year-old Marcus Webb had felt it coming. For 3 days, the crescent-shaped birthmark on his right palm had been burning. Not painfully, but with a persistent warmth that reminded him constantly of its presence. Marcus had always hated that mark. Kids in elementary school said it looked like a wizard's scar. By middle school, they'd upgraded their creativity to devil's fingernail and witch's smile. He'd learned to keep his hand in his pocket, to write with it tucked against his palm, to exist as if that part of him simply wasn't there. But for 3 days, hiding it had become impossible. The warmth had started as a tingle on Sunday morning. By Monday, it felt like he was holding a coin that had been left in the sun. Tuesday brought a pulsing sensation, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat that didn't match his own. And now, Wednesday night, as his family sat in the living room trying to figure out why their phones had died mid-sentence and their television had gone black without warning, the mark felt like it was alive. Marcus pressed his right hand against his jeans, trying to suppress whatever was happening. His mother was lighting candles with shaking hands. His father stood at the window, peering out at a neighborhood that had become a pit of ink. His younger sister, Emma, sat on the couch hugging, her knees, her eyes wide and reflecting the small dancing flames. "It's probably just a transformer," his father said, but his voice carried no conviction. "Or maybe it's some kind of attack, an EMP or something." "Don't say that," his mother whispered. "Don't scare the kids." But Marcus was already scared, and not because of the blackout. The warmth in his palm had evolved into something else, a pressure, a building intensity, like a sneeze that wouldn't come or a scream trapped in his throat. Every instinct told him to stay still, to keep his hand hidden, to wait for whatever this was to pass. Then Emma gasped and pointed at him. "Marcus, your hand." He looked down and felt his heart stop. Light was seeping between his fingers. Not the warm yellow of candlelight, but something else. Something silver white and cold, like moonlight condensed into liquid form. The glow was intensifying with every second, pushing through the spaces between his clenched fingers like water through a dam about to break. "What the hell?" his father breathed. Marcus tried to make it stop. He pressed his hand harder against his leg, squeezed his fist tighter, even tried to smother it under a couch cushion. But the light was insistent, growing brighter, more urgent, as if it had been waiting for this moment for 16 years and would not be denied any longer. "Make it stop," Emma cried. But there was something else in her voice besides fear, something like awe. And then Marcus felt it. A pull, not physical but undeniable, coming from outside, from above, from somewhere in that lightless sky. It wasn't a voice, not exactly, but more like a knowing, a certainty planted directly in his mind. "Open your hand." "No," he whispered. "Open your hand." The pressure became unbearable. The mark burned now, truly burned. Marcus realized with absolute clarity that he had exactly two choices: obey, or let whatever was building inside his palm consume him from the inside out. With a cry that was half fear and half surrender, Marcus thrust his right hand into the air. The crescent mark erupted with light. It wasn't an explosion. There was no sound, no force, no heat. But the illumination that burst from his palm was so intense, so pure, that it turned night into day within a 50-foot radius. The living room became visible in every detail. The shock frozen on his family's faces. The dust motes suspended in air. The cheap framed photos on the wall suddenly looking like artifacts in a museum display. Outside, people screamed, not in terror, but in relief and confusion and something approaching religious ecstasy. Through the window, Marcus could see them emerging from their homes, drawn like moths to his impossible light. Some were crying, some were laughing. Some just stood with their faces upturned, basking in the glow that poured from the marked hand of an ordinary teenage boy who had never been chosen for anything in his entire life. "What's happening to me?" Marcus whispered, but no one answered. Because something else was happening now. As the light spread and the people gathered, Marcus felt a new sensation, the unmistakable weight of being watched. Not by the crowd forming outside his house, not by his terrified family, but by something vast, something ancient, something that existed in the space where the moon should have been, but wasn't. Something in the empty sky was paying attention. And Marcus understood, with a dread that sank into his bones like ice water, that this night was far from over. The light in his hand wasn't just showing him the way. It was showing him to something else. Within minutes, Marcus's front yard was filled with people. They came from every direction, stumbling through the darkness toward the only source of light in the entire city. Some held their hands up to shield their eyes from the intensity. Others reached out as if trying to touch the glow itself, as if it were something solid they could hold. Marcus stood on his porch, right hand still raised above his head, unable to lower it even if he wanted to. The mark had taken control. It pulsed with a rhythm that felt ancient, deliberate, like a lighthouse beam cutting through fog. And with each pulse, the light extended further, pushing back the darkness in waves that washed over the growing crowd. His father had tried to pull him back inside. His mother had wrapped a towel around his hand, hoping to contain the glow. Both attempts had failed spectacularly. The towel had simply become translucent, and his father's grip had slipped away as if Marcus's arm were made of oil. There was no stopping this. There was no hiding it. "Please," a woman's voice called from the crowd. "Please don't go. Don't let it go out." Marcus looked at the faces illuminated by his palm. He saw Mrs. Chen from 3 houses down, still wearing her bathrobe. He saw the Hoffmans, the family who never spoke to anyone. standing close together with tears streaming down their faces. He saw strangers, dozens of them, all looking at him with an expression he'd never seen directed at himself before. They were looking at him like he mattered, like he was important, like he was something more than the quiet kid who sat in the back of Mr. Peterson's history class and had never been picked for anything, not even dodgeball. "What do you want from me?" Marcus called out, his voice cracking. "Just stay," someone shouted back. "Just keep shining." But it wasn't that simple. Marcus could feel something changing in the quality of the light, in the nature of what was pouring from his hand. It was getting stronger, yes, but also more demanding. The warmth had become heat. The glow had become almost painful to maintain. And that presence above, that watching, waiting thing in the moonless sky, was pressing down harder with each passing moment. He looked up, tilting his head back to stare into the absolute blackness overhead. No stars, no moon, nothing but void. Yet he could feel it there, massive and patient, like a great eye that had opened just to observe this moment, to observe him. "Marcus, we need to get you inside." His father had returned, this time with more urgency. "This isn't natural. I don't know what this is, but they need the light, Dad." The words came out of Marcus's mouth before he'd consciously decided to speak them. Without it, they're lost. It was true. In every direction beyond the radius of his glow, the darkness was total and terrifying. No streetlights were coming back on. No generators were rumbling to life. The blackout had settled over Ashford like a burial shroud, and Marcus Webb, awkward, forgettable Marcus Webb, had become the only candle in a cathedral of night. The crowd was growing. 50 people, 70, 100. They formed concentric circles around his house, their faces upturned, their eyes reflecting silver-white light. Some had started to kneel. Others held hands. A few were praying. Marcus could see their lips moving, though he couldn't hear the words over the general murmur of awe and fear. And then someone started following him. Marcus hadn't realized he was moving until it was already happening. His feet had begun to carry him forward, down the porch steps, through the front yard, toward the street. The light moved with him, of course, a bubble of visibility that traveled wherever he went. And as he walked, the crowd parted, then reformed behind him, a procession forming without anyone making a conscious decision to create one. "Marcus, stop!" his mother screamed. "Where are you going?" He didn't know. He didn't have an answer. His legs were moving on their own, following some invisible path that the marks seemed to understand, even if he didn't. He was a lighthouse, yes. But lighthouses don't move. Lighthouses stand still and let the ships come to them. So what did that make him now? A comet? A star falling to Earth? A prophet leading his people through the wilderness? The thought should have been absurd. But in this moment, with hundreds of eyes on him and that vast presence above, watching his every step, it felt terrifyingly possible. They walked through the neighborhoods of Ashford like a pilgrimage. Marcus led, his hand held high, the crescent mark blazing. Behind him came the crowd, growing with every block as more people emerged from their homes, drawn by whispered reports of a boy with light in his hand and the only thing shining in the whole city. They followed at a respectful distance, close enough to stay within the circle of illumination, but far enough back to give him space, as if he were holy, untouchable, set apart. Marcus could hear them talking in hushed voices. Is he doing this on purpose? Maybe he's one of those, what do you call them? Chosen ones. My grandmother used to tell stories about people marked by God. This is mass hysteria, Has to be. Then explain the light. I can't. Marcus wanted to tell them he wasn't chosen, that this was a mistake, that the mark on his palm had been nothing but an embarrassing birthmark until 3 days ago, and he had no idea why it had suddenly decided to become something else. He wanted to run home, crawl into bed, and wake up to discover this was all some kind of fever dream. But he couldn't stop walking. And worse, some part of him didn't want to. Because for the first time in his life, people were following him. People needed him. He wasn't invisible anymore. He wasn't the kid everyone forgot was in the room. He was the center, the axis, the point around which everything else revolved. It felt good. God help him, it felt incredible. And that's when Marcus felt the presence above shift its attention from passive observation to something more active, more intentional. The pressure increased tenfold. The air itself seemed to thicken, becoming harder to breathe. The light from his palm flickered, just for a second, but enough to send a wave of panic through the crowd. People gasped. Someone screamed. The procession stumbled to a halt. Don't stop, voices pleaded from the darkness. Please don't let it go out. Marcus gritted his teeth and focused, pouring every ounce of will into maintaining the light. It steadied, brightened, pushed back against whatever force was trying to extinguish it. Sweat poured down his face. His arm trembled with effort. But he held it. He held it because they needed him to, because he wanted them to need him. The realization hit him like a slap. He was enjoying this. Not just the light, not just the relief of pushing back the darkness, but the power, the control, the way people looked at him, spoke to him, followed him without question. Was that wrong? It felt wrong. But it also felt right in a way nothing else ever had. The crowd had grown to several hundred now, a river of people flowing through the streets of Ashford with Marcus as their guiding star. They had walked nearly 2 miles from his house, winding through neighborhoods, past the shut-down gas station and the darkened shopping plaza, toward the center of town where the old courthouse stood. Marcus hadn't consciously chosen this destination, but somehow he knew that this was where he was supposed to go, where whatever was happening needed to happen. The courthouse square was empty when they arrived, a flat expanse of concrete and dead grass surrounded by colonial-era buildings that looked like tombstones in the darkness. Marcus stopped in the center of the square. His procession spreading out in a semicircle behind him, hundreds of faces watching, waiting. For what? He didn't have to wonder long. The pressure from above intensified until Marcus thought his skull would crack from it. The light in his palm surged, became blinding, bright enough that people in the crowd had to look away or cover their eyes. And then, slowly, impossibly, Marcus felt his consciousness expanding, stretching upward, reaching into that empty sky where the moon should have been. And he saw it, not with his eyes, with something else. Some sense he hadn't known he possessed until this moment. The moon was there. It had always been there. But it was invisible, cloaked in darkness so complete that it had become a void within the void. A circular absence that swallowed all light that touched it. And in that darkness, in that hidden lunar surface, something vast and incomprehensible was watching. Not malevolent, not benevolent, just aware. And then it spoke. Not in words, but in understanding that bloomed directly in Marcus's mind, bypassing language entirely. You have been tested. Marcus couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The presence wasn't just watching anymore. It was inside him, vast and infinite, filling every corner of his consciousness with a weight that should have crushed him, but somehow didn't. It was like being submerged in an ocean of awareness, every drop of water a thought too large for human comprehension. "You have been tested," the presence repeated. And this time Marcus understood that it wasn't speaking to him alone. It was speaking through him, using his body as a conduit, his light as a voice. The crowd fell silent. Even those who couldn't hear the words seemed to sense that something monumental was occurring. They dropped to their knees instinctively, hundreds of people kneeling in the courthouse square, their faces illuminated by the blazing crescent in Marcus's raised palm. When darkness covered the earth, when fear consumed the people, you were given a gift, not by accident, not by chance. The mark you have carried your entire life was always meant for this moment. Marcus's mind reeled. His birthmark, the thing he'd hidden, the thing he'd been ashamed of, had been placed there deliberately. By what? By whom? Questions tumbled through his thoughts, but the presence wasn't finished. You were given light in the darkness. You were given power when all others were powerless. And now I have watched to see what you would do with it. The word settled into Marcus's bones like ice. Watched to see what he would do. This had been a test. All of it. The blackout, the manifestation of the light, the crowd, the journey through the streets. All of it had been arranged, orchestrated, designed to measure him. But measure what? His worthiness? His character? His... The answer came before he could finish the thought, and it terrified him more than the darkness ever had. Would you use the gift to guide or to dominate? The question hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Marcus felt his throat constrict, felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Because he knew, God, he knew, that for a few glorious minutes, as he'd walked through Ashford with hundreds following in his wake, he hadn't just been guiding them to safety. He'd been enjoying their submission, their need, their worship. He'd felt powerful, important, superior. And some dark, hungry part of him had wanted more. Wanted them to keep following, keep kneeling, keep looking at him like he was something divine. He'd imagined what it would be like to keep this light forever. To be the one person everyone depended on. To never be invisible or forgettable again. He'd wanted to be their savior. But somewhere in that wanting, the line between savior and tyrant had started to blur. I didn't mean... Marcus started to speak aloud, his voice breaking. I just wanted to help them. I swear I... Do not lie. Not to me. Not to yourself. The words cut through his excuses like a blade through paper. Tears streamed down Marcus's face now, hot and shameful. The crowd watched in confusion, unable to hear the conversation happening in the space between the mortal and the infinite. But sensing the gravity of whatever judgment was being passed, you felt the power. You tasted the adoration, and you wanted to keep it. Yes, Marcus whispered, the admission ripping out of him. Yes, I did. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The presence shifted, and for a moment Marcus thought it would withdraw, thought the light would be ripped from his palm. He'd be left standing alone in the darkness, exposed as unworthy. A failure who couldn't even pass a divine test without being corrupted by pride. But instead, something unexpected happened. All who are given power face this temptation. The question is not whether you felt it. The question is what you will do now that you understand it. Marcus looked down at his hand, at the crescent mark still blazing with impossible light. The crowd was still there, still waiting, still depending on him. The darkness beyond his radius of illumination remained absolute. Nothing had changed in the physical world, but everything had changed in him. He understood now. The mark wasn't a gift. It was a burden. It was a responsibility. And every moment he held this light, he would have to choose again and again whether to use it for them or for himself, whether to guide or to dominate, whether to serve or to rule. The choice would never get easier. The temptation would never fully disappear. That was the real test. Not whether he could resist corruption once, but whether he could resist it every single day for the rest of his life. "What do you want me to do?" Marcus asked, his voice steady now despite the tears. "Finish what you started. Lead them home. And when the dawn comes, when the light returns to the world, remember what you learned in the darkness." The pressure began to ease. The vast presence started to withdraw, pulling back like a tide receding from shore. But before it left completely, Marcus felt one more transmission of understanding, one final message meant only for him. The mark will remain. The power will remain. You have been tested, Marcus Webb, and you have not failed. But neither have you fully succeeded. You stand at the beginning of a very long path. Walk it with humility, or it will destroy you. And then the presence was gone, contracted back into that invisible moon, that dark circle in a dark sky that no one else could see. Marcus stood alone with his thoughts for exactly 3 seconds before a voice from the crowd broke the silence. "Are you okay? What happened?" He turned to face them, all those people who had followed him through the darkness, who had trusted him to lead them somewhere safe. They looked frightened, confused, hopeful. They looked human, just as lost and uncertain as he was, just trying to survive a night that made no sense. They weren't subjects. They weren't followers. They were people, and they needed to get home. "Come on," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the square with a clarity that surprised him. "Let's get everyone back to their families." He didn't wait for agreement, didn't pause for applause or acknowledgement. He simply started walking, retracing their steps through the darkened city, his hand held high, not as a symbol of power, but as a tool, a flashlight. Nothing more, nothing less. Behind him, the crowd reformed, but it felt different now. Less like a procession and more like a group of neighbors helping each other through a crisis. The walk back took over an hour. Marcus stopped at major intersections, making sure everyone knew which direction to head. He waited as families reunited, as elderly residents were helped back to their homes, as parents found their children in the crowd. His arm ached from holding it up for so long. His legs burned with fatigue, but he kept going. By the time they reached his neighborhood, the crowd had dispersed naturally, people splitting off toward their own streets, their own houses. The procession of hundreds had dwindled to dozens, then to a handful, then to just his own family waiting anxiously on their front lawn. "Marcus!" His mother rushed forward, pulling him into a fierce embrace. "We've been so worried. We tried to follow, but there were so many people and..." "I'm okay, Mom," he said quietly. "I'm okay." Emma stared at his still glowing hand with wide eyes. "What happened out there? Everyone's saying you're some kind of, I don't know, prophet or something." "I'm not a prophet," Marcus said firmly. "I'm just me, with a weird birthmark that decided to light up during a blackout." His father studied him with an expression Marcus had never seen before. Something like respect mixed with concern. "Son, that wasn't just a weird birthmark. That was..." "I know what it was, Dad." Marcus looked down at his palm, at the crescent mark still glowing softly in the night. "And I don't understand it. Not really. But I know it's not about me being special. It's about responsibility, choice, using what you're given the right way. Before anyone could respond, the world changed again. The streetlights flickered once, twice, then blazed back to life. All down the block, houses lit up window by window. Car alarms chirped as electronic systems rebooted. In the distance, the city was waking up. Electricity flooding back through the grid like blood returning to a sleeping limb. And as the artificial light returned to Ashford, the glow from Marcus's palm began to fade. Not suddenly, but gradually, like a sunset in reverse. The crescent mark dimmed from blazing white to soft silver to a gentle luminescence that could barely be seen. And finally, as dawn's first gray light touched the eastern horizon, to nothing at all. Marcus lowered his arm for the first time in hours. The mark was still there, still visible as a pale crescent shape against his skin. But it was just a birthmark again. Ordinary, quiet, waiting. "Is it over?" Emma whispered. Marcus looked up at the sky. The sun was rising, painting clouds in shades of orange and pink. And there, faint but visible in the growing light, was the thinnest sliver of a crescent moon hanging just above the western horizon. It had been there all along, invisible in the darkness, waiting to be seen again. "Yeah," Marcus said softly. "It's over." But he knew that wasn't entirely true. The test was over. The blackout was over. This particular night was over. But the mark remained. The power remained. And according to that vast, incomprehensible presence, he was just at the beginning of something much longer. His family headed inside as neighbors began emerging to survey the aftermath of the strangest night in Ashford's history. Marcus stayed on the lawn for a moment longer, his right hand held up in front of his face, examining the crescent mark in the pale morning light. It looked so innocent, so small. Just a quirk of genetics, a random pattern of melanin in his skin. No one looking at it now would believe it had blazed like a star, had lit up streets, had drawn hundreds of people into the darkness to follow a 16-year-old boy they barely knew. No one would believe that God, or something like God, had been watching from an invisible moon. No one would believe that he'd been tested and found. What? Worthy? Unworthy? Somewhere in between? Marcus didn't know. But he did know one thing. The next time the mark began to warm, the next time that pull came from above, the next time he was offered power in the darkness, he would remember this night. He would remember the choice he'd made and the choice he'd almost made. He would remember the weight of all those eyes looking at him with trust, with need, with hope. And he would remember that the greatest temptation isn't the desire to do evil. It's the desire to be worshipped while doing good. Marcus lowered his hand and walked inside, leaving the brightening sky behind. The mark on his palm tingled once, a gentle reminder, then fell silent. In the western sky, the crescent moon faded from view as daylight claimed the world. But it was still there, watching, waiting, always watching, always waiting.